welcome to Conversations with Life. I'm Xochi. I'm here with Cedar, aka Steve, and Keith, and today we're going to talk about sex.
Yeah, this is always one that people pay attention to. You know, this is
surprising.
When we taught our class at the festival this last weekend on sex. You know, the tent fills up. People are interested and they're encountering this, especially people who are on a worldview shift, you know, moving from some kind of fundamental belief to something else. It's a lot. And it also is one of the most personal things you can talk about, right? Like, so everybody, just to caveat this discussion or whatever, can caveat be a verb? Whatever.
Sure. Yeah,
okay,
why not?
we're gonna make it a verb. So
the English language is evolving. Skibbity is a word now. Don't worry
everybody
about
gets
it.
to approach their own sexuality and their own spirituality, right? As they will. Anything that we say about it is definitely not applicable to everybody's path. Yet there are some universal things and seeings that I think are useful, or at least some things to poke at or work with. So
yeah, I think there are a few reasons that it gets a lot of attention. I mean, even just on a larger scale in the media, in the collective, sex sells, right? There's that whole thing, but but in this, even in this, you know, spiritual niche place, it seems to be for many people kind of a last frontier. Like, I'm gonna work on self-improvement in all of these areas. I'm gonna work on my spirituality in all of these areas, but the sexuality seems to be kind of still taboo in a lot of ways.
Well, in the West, for sure, because we put so much shame on it. You know, the Puritan tradition is alive and well.
Oh, yeah.
When it comes to sexuality, people have expectations, they have misunderstandings, and then on the other side, it's been used to manipulate people into buying shit. You know, put a sexy model on your cover, and people buy more. Obviously, because they keep putting sexy models.
Yeah, I mean, it seems
cover.
to be effective, right? Even like trucks now. Like,
So,
why?
Yeah, and we'll listen to it. We'll listen to that, you know, and we'll notice it even if we're not noticing it. You know, it's a visceral response. You know, sexual images, it creates a visceral response that creates an impulse and response. So, you know, it's been toyed with, worked with, and then on the religious front, it's also been used to create power. You know, you should feel bad about yourself. I mean, gods in my Mormon faith, you know, you were interviewed every so often to find out if you were masturbating. You know, that, like, we're going to take the most personal thing and we're going to put you in this room with this guy. And
I was going to say, as a young child, we're going to put you in a room with usually a 60-plus-year-old white man.
Yes.
Who's going to then ask you probing questions about your sexuality. I mean, I didn't grow up in it, right? Like, I joined later, but I had like little girls, and I was like, that's a hard pass.
That's a hard pass, yeah.
That's what I think.
And there's been a lot said about that, but that's not just Mormonism. That's every religion that has taken sexuality and used it as a coin to create guilt and shame, which creates people's need for religion, because I need to be saved from myself. If I have a sexual impulse, you know, that's bad. If whoever looketh upon a woman to lust after her, it's the same. You've committed adultery. I don't know all that, right? Holy shit, we're all fucked right there. The world is fucked, you know. So, you know, it's been used to commercialize. It's been used to create power for people in control and religion, and so there's a lot there. You know, there's a lot in it in the West, especially.
Well, and it makes me wonder if part of the reason it sells is because it's been put so far into the shadow that it lives in the place of impulse.
Right. And I mean, anything you can't have, you want more, right? So like, yeah. I mean, can we like, I don't know how much you guys looked into like porn addiction as a thing, right? Typically speaking, it does happen everywhere in the world, but typically speaking, in places where religion and shame are so tied together, it's insanely prevalent. Utah has one of the biggest porn problems in the world.
Totally.
And like, whereas compared to a place that doesn't have that same religious connotation, porn isn't as harmful or as addictive because the dopamine part of it comes from the taboo nature of porn. And so if you don't make it shameful, it's actually a lot less addictive for the human mind. Like it's crazy. It rewires your brain the way that we deal with it, and it becomes this thing of like, you know, I know people who have battled with porn addictions and sex trauma their whole life that they probably wouldn't have had at all if there wasn't the shame tied and connected with it. It's just insane.
Yeah, I have, some important people in my life that have dealt with that journey, and it really was a matter of once there was permission, like the impulse, there was just not a charge. Right. So then they were free to actually find a relationship with it as, as a coping strategy, as art. And I think when people are in that space, they're also much more likely to find ethical porn that's produced as art instead of the stuff that is, produced that in an abusive way.
Looked into it. I experienced it for 40 years, I was addicted to porn, And, I'll tell a funny story here. Two funny stories. One, there was a study done at BYU, and they found they were looking at porn addiction, since this is a problem that a lot of Mormons work with, and they've like the number one thing that induces porn addiction, a pre-existing condition, is that you think porn is bad.
Yeah, that's what I mean. The shame and the religious coin, if you like. Yeah.
It's just so funny that study came out of BYU. And
it's great.
It's perfect. They're like looking at this, this is what the data says. Fuck it. And another thing is, I felt very shamed, and I experience myself as a very sexual person, and a lot of sexual energy, whatever it is, and. That was something that even though I had a very, I think, healthy, sexual relationship in my marriage, no problem with, there wasn't a compressed sexuality there, it was expressed between us. And I still was addicted to porn. What happened is, my wife and I eventually opened up our marriage, and the first girl that I was with, post-marriage, second girl I've ever had sex with in my life, no porn addiction. Goes away entirely. Like nothing, I didn't view porn for maybe years, or maybe incidentally here and there. But that to me was so weird, because this was a compulsion, something that I did not like, because I have no problem with porn now, right? In my current worldview. But abusive porn, there's practices that obviously
the industry healthy. Sucks.
The industry can be terrible, and it's usy and so forth. Most industries are usy and terrible.
Yeah.
It just as happens to be, prey on young girls, etc. But that was so revealing to me, and what that said to me is when my sexuality felt okay to me, when I could meet it with some kind of choice. With my current worldview operating and engaging in a way that felt open and expansive, no addiction, gone. Yeah. So it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. And I, my journey with my sexuality was, I think as a child, I was pretty explorative and open, but, as soon as I found out it was wrong,
found out.
The kind of, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. Kind of, little kid stuff that I did. Okay, yeah. There was a moment where I got in trouble for that.
Sure.
I completely shut it down. It was like, I'm here to. If I ever have to do that, it's just gonna be to have babies.
Yeah.
That's the only good use for that thing.
Which is the rhetoric, right? That is the rhetoric. I'm even here. I mean, the amount of things I heard from women that I know who grew up in this church, but also in other, I was Catholic before this, and the analogies are insane, are awful.
Yeah.
Right? Everyone knows that why buy the cow if you can get the milk for free? That's already really scummy, right?
Yeah.
But also assuming that all I want is the milk, right? Anyway,
right.
But also the I heard ones that were what was it? Nobody wants to chew an already chewed piece of gum.
Yes, that's
the already chewed gum, the crushed rose.
The used tissue was the one that I was like, that's nasty. Like who the fuck hurt you that you're telling my like 7-year-old that she would be a used tissue?
Such a weird view of sexuality. You know, something like that
it lessens you in some way to explore a very real part of who you are.
That any experience there is somehow invalid.
And then until marriage, and then everything's fine.
Yeah.
Right? Because like that's what got me. It was like, right, once you're married, it's all good. Hold on. You're gonna load these little girls with so much trauma and repression that they're afraid to look sideways at a boy. And then you expect them to go get married, go to bed that night, and just be totally fine.
Yeah. Right.
Are you out of your fucking... Like, who on earth thinks that first night is going well for anyone?
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like, especially when you have the other side of that, when the men in, let's say the church, it's what I'm used to, right? The men in the church are told, like, you are God, you are almighty, you are powerful, you are in charge, you are in control. So you give them a God control complex and the women an inferiority and fear complex and put them in a bedroom together and be like, fuck. And they're like, fuck. I don't like, it's only going to go bad.
And that's dysfunctional somehow? I don't understand.
I don't know
why that would be the case.
That's so weird. But it's so common and so prevalent, and not just in this church, but in any, I can't think of a Western religion that I've been a part of or explored where that's not somehow part of the rhetoric. Even if it's quiet and calm and not as intense, it's somehow part of it, right? And then it just becomes, it doesn't even matter what happens after that. You can't uncondition without help all of that repression from childhood just because you are marrying someone that you think is a good guy, right? Yeah. Especially when you're getting married at 19. Like, none of you know what the fuck you're doing, and you're going to do it bad, and you're going to do things wrong, and you're going to hurt each other, and like, and then it's like, well, I just got hurt by this thing that I got told was bad and painful my whole life. So now it's reaffirming this negative thing from the past instead of, you know,
but at that point, it's supposed to be the most sacred thing you can do. And somehow, like, engaging in the most sacred thing you can do and it not going well means I must be doing God wrong.
Right.
You know, and
I'm the problem.
It's rough.
And then it's, I mean, like, the amount of stories I heard of women going to their church and being like, I'm being abused, and the church then being like, you're doing it wrong, go back and fix it, like, go back and fix your marriage. And they're like, what? And like, it's assault. And no, you're fine, just go back and smile, you'll be all right. Like, oh my God, like, the was honestly probably the biggest reason for me leaving was all that stuff, and having girls and knowing they were going to experience that was like my number one. I'm out.
Yeah, a huge catalyst for me was the way that my boys were being interviewed and disciplined in their teenage years around this subject.
Same.
Oof. Heavy.
So, yeah, and growing up with this idea that women aren't sexual and don't have sexual needs because they're too virtuous for that.
Ugh.
And that, like, it's like a service that you do for your husband. That was very alive in me and in my marriage, and that, you know, men are kind of these like beastly creatures that need sex and women don't, but we have to give it to them because otherwise they turn into these angry animals.
Oh God.
And it's, it was fascinating for me to find my sexual self, find my sensual self, and it started when the first day I didn't wear the garments, I felt my shirt brush against my belly. And I was like, whoa. I liked that, how that felt.
Yeah.
And it was like, whoa, is it okay for me to like how my body feels? And, you know, then my soul took me into this total 180 from, I'm going to protect my kids from any sexual content whatsoever, including, you know, innuendo and euphemisms.
We didn't get close.
When we did not get close to anything. But, you know, I did talk to them and did the, you know, the proper whatever sex talk and use the correct words or whatever, I was trying so hard to do this good. But to go from that place of intense fear, intense fear. One of the hardest things for me to reconcile early on was, talking with my husband and learning about his journey with the whole church interview thing, and his experience with self-exploration being something that he found as a child and really loved it and didn't know it was wrong, and then all of a sudden here's somebody asking him about it and telling him it's wrong. And that just like did something in my brain. I was like, something's not right here. If a child is just discovering something like this and having a positive experience, and then an adult's coming in and saying, you can't do this. You shouldn't be able to touch your own body for pleasure. That kind of haunted me for 20 years before I actually left the church. And yeah, so what do you do when you're in this journey and you step out that door? There's a whole world of permission, and I've seen a huge spectrum of how people engage, when they step out of fundamental religion, or even, whatever cultural suppressed, repressed story that they grew up under. And it can get pretty wild. This, post-religious, exploring your sexuality as a middle-aged person.
Yeah, it does, because people have resources and stuff, and it's really interesting. You kind of have to go through that adolescence,
Yeah.
And there is a place where almost being irresponsible is responsible, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's funny. We used to read in school. We used to read a book called "And There Was Light" by Jacques Lucien. And, he's a guy who grew up French. He's describing his perfect childhood, and he's talking about the scene where they're in this garden and there's like this greenhouse or whatever. And the kids used to go in there and when they were 9 or 10 or 11 and kind of fool around, explore themselves. And you'll see in European countries, kids walking around naked and nobody has a thing.
Yeah.
They'll put boobs on a billboard, and nobody is like, "Oh, that shouldn't."
Danger!
How danger!
Naked weatherman.
It's not like I don't think we should encourage our kids to okay, go be sexual. Like that's not the way it is. But there's a natural kind of innocent exploration of sexuality that was displayed in the scene in this book, and to me, it was just beautiful. It was like. Yeah, he was like, that was delightful. It was a part of my awakening as a child and part of my seeing as a child,
Yeah.
And, it was kind of interesting, funny to read that with Mormon kids, who are not having that experience.
Yeah.
And, a cultural, oh, wow, that's really odd, So it's interesting. On the other hand, like you say, sexuality can fuck you up. Right? Our passions, right? Our passions will possess us.
Yeah.
And the young quote I read this week was the man who has not been consumed in the inferno of his passions has not overcome them. Mm-hmm. Or another quote, he says, has not really lived. The man who's not consumed in the inferno of his passions has not really lived. And it's like there's a fire there. There's the moral rules against against sexual expression or whatever have some logical basis.
Yeah.
And so you see that it's only when there's some caution to be had. It's not like, oh, everybody just be as sexual as you want with it, however you want, etc. Uh-huh. Well, actually, I do think that, but
within the context of what you're capable of, right? You don't want kids running around and doing sexual things in the world, but once you understand the repercussions of what you're doing and what it is that you're doing, I feel like the freedom is open.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. David Data says this thing is if you're going to engage sexually, make sure that you're willing to be 100% responsible for your experience.
Exactly. And for that, you have to know
Yeah, there has to be some education and a capacity for consent.
Yeah, capacity for consent is the problem, and that's why immaturity is a problem when engaging sexually, because you don't have the capacity for consent. There's an awkward phase between childhood play and adult consent. This is why we're all gonna get messed up. The whole thing, life is a setup, and you're gonna get fucked up by your sexuality at some point. You're going to try to engage in a way that doesn't honor somebody. Somebody's going to try to engage with you in a way that doesn't honor you. This is going to happen, right? This is part of the game, and understanding that I think is really important. But the thing is, when we put sexuality here, we're not prepared for that. There's no teaching there. There's no understanding there. So it becomes actually double dangerous, and people are more likely to be irresponsible and have difficulty and trauma.
Can you explain it for me again? Putting your sexuality out here to our audio listeners, what are we talking about right now?
Meaning that I engage with my sexuality as if it's a thing that I have to deal with. It's an obstacle. It's outside of yourself. It's not my it's not here essence in myself. It's not something that is so much a part of me that is just like living. It's just like drinking water, breathing, right? Yeah. Having sex or being sexual is just like drinking water. You're going to do it if you want to live a healthy, full human life.
Sure.
In my experience. And we could take sex on a wider thing too. Maybe somebody they're asexual or something, but they're going to have sensual and energetic experiences with the world or with others that are juicy, whatever. So we'll talk about sex as an expansive thing versus sex as a physical thing. That's a whole another ball of wax. But we put our strict morality puts parts of ourselves out here. Our violence is out here. Our sexuality is out here. It's not part of us. We have to just engage with it and let it in small doses and engage with it as if
keep it under control and rein it in.
Yeah. Rather than accept my violence as a part of me, accept my sexuality as a full part of me. Right. That's a whole other way of being with it.
Okay.
Thanks for the question.
I have a question for you, for both of you.
Okay.
What do you think turn on is?
I mean, I think just listen to it, turn on, right? It's like, for me, it's like not even a flicking of a switch, but it's an engagement of that energy, right? So it's, if my spouse is something that turns me on, or if I am turned on, I am aware of my sexuality, and it is in the forefront of my mind. Like, it comes to the surface, and it'll, as a young lad, it happens at the drop of a hat, right? Especially if that hat is too close to your pants. And then, as a grown up, you get better at knowing when it's going to be a thing, right? But it's almost consuming, and it's energetic, it's alive, it's electrifying, it's this rush.
Do you ever feel turned on by things that aren't necessarily sexual?
I think that when you experience something that you really need, something is turned on, regardless of sexually or otherwise, right? So if you're someone who hasn't ever had validation and was in an abusive relationship and all those sorts of things, someone validating your needs can be a turn on, right? Like, I've been doing the dishes and vacuuming and found that my partner is like, I'm turned on by this. It's like, why? I'm not even that sudsy, right? Something else is going on. So I think when a need is met, sometimes it excites that part of you too, because it just feels so validating and holding it. It's just, I think so.
Do you feel a similarity between that, what you're describing, and when you really feel passionate about a project or a creative experience?
I think the similar energy level for sure, but it's to me it's a very different energy, right? If I'm excited about a classroom or teaching or editing or even I've been doing some biking and stuff, when I'm excited about a thing that I'm going to go and do, or a passionate project, it's exciting, it's energizing, it's intense. But it is very different. I don't know if that's just me. I keep them very separate in my head maybe, but it feels like when I'm thirsty and I have a drink feels very different to when I'm turned on and I have sex. Right? Still validating and fulfilling, but in a different way.
Okay. Cool. What about you, Steve?
To me, that's the yes energy that we talked about in the boundaries episode. It's that yes energy being drawn, like resonating with a yes, right? So drink of water. When I'm really thirsty, it's like, yes, a touch, a handshake, a look, even a conversation is a yes. It's like that essence of my energy. Now, eros is a little different, right? So like, I think there's a turn on that the eros gets involved in, and that erotic energy, and there's a turn on that doesn't. But I think it's all the same system essentially. I think it's just kind of where and to what degree we choose to turn on. If you choose to turn down all the way down to your core, you're sexually aroused. And if you choose to turn on in your heart, I'm connected. If I choose to turn on in my solar plexus, well, we feel powerful together, right? Like there's and zillions of other energies that we run. Chakras are just convenient to talk about, but like. Yeah, to me, it's like my yes, and from any particular place, that's said. In fact, I mean, I think you can turn on from your eros without turning on your heart, and then you're in trouble.
Yeah,
or maybe that's the container.
There's a whole industry for that.
Maybe you're doing that consciously, and that's okay.
Yeah.
But if you're doing it unconsciously, then you're going to exercise your sexual turn on without connection, that kind of thing. So to me, it's like. Anytime that my energy opens, anytime I feel the up move of energy, that's turn on.
Yeah.
And if my genitals get involved, that's a sexual turn on. But man, I could eat food and feel a sexual turn on. That's a connection that gets made all the time. In fact, a sensual meal with a sensual experience is great. People experience that all the time.
Like. The more I integrate my sexuality as a thing, like you were saying, it's like breathing. It's just, the less of a line there is between different turn-ons. Like, and I teach classes like live orgasmically. How many moments of your life can you be in that orgasmic state of turn-on? And that doesn't necessarily mean that you're putting your genitals up against somebody else's. It's an energetic experience of deep presence and permission, and that creative energy is flowing.
When presence invites fullness, or fullness invites presence, that's sex. To spill on the big picture of sex, right? So when I have a focus and I draw energy. To a thing, that's what happens. If I choose something, I'll draw energy to it, and if I inhabit my fullness, just life, there'll be presence drawn. Now I can do that internally, externally, all those things. I mean, there's kind of the universe is sexual in nature, you could say, in that way.
Yeah,
not erotic necessarily, but erotic. Right. So, but that creates a whole different game here.
Yeah, and we've had many conversations about, ecstatic versus erotic, and I don't feel like I've ever really come to like an answer, but the question, the conversation, to me, this is one of those places that I think it's valuable because I learn both more about my ecstatic expression and my erotic expression, and I still am not completely sure what the difference is, and in my experience, those differences seem to be like kind of fading into each other, where because I hold less charge around erotic energy, more things in my life have permission to be erotic.
Right.
So I can totally have an erotic experience with food or with a conversation or but that doesn't necessarily mean that, a part of my body is being stimulated to orgasm.
Right.
So yeah, it's curious to me what draws that line between the rush of energy you feel, like you were saying, Keith, when you drink water versus the rush of energy you feel when your partner says just the right thing versus the rush of energy you feel when you see a really beautiful naked or partially clad woman.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny because there's a biological turn on, right? So we're programmed to propagate the species, you know, there's a part of us that's animal. And when we see a certain, skin tone, all these things have been proven, certain curves,
hip
right?
Length,
Hips for sure, stuff, because people are like, ooh, babies, you know, not people, but biology is like, ooh, babies. There's a certain thing that triggers that biological response in us, right? And that's a type of opening, right? I'm going to say that if somebody lives there in their sexuality their whole life with only a biological turn on, they're missing out on a huge part of what sexuality really is, right? To me, that's a symbol of turn on. And, it's good that the species gets propagated, I think. Sure. I'm assuming mankind is an okay thing. Right. But, I don't know. I'm one of them, so I can't really say.
What other option do we have?
But, there might be other entities in the galaxy that say maybe not, but, maybe we're vermin. Who knows? We wouldn't know. But, like that biological turn on, in my experience, is a symbol of the real thing that's available in sexuality. And it's interesting because we talk about Tantra, and Tantra is this.
The consciousness meeting itself.
Consciousness meeting itself. And Tantra in the West, Neo-Tantra has become sexual, but Tantra as a tradition just celebrates this energy. Shiva Shakti, right? This is pure presence, which is destruction, creation, meeting absolute fullness in our bodies, in our lives, in our worlds, right? Interpersonally, that's the game, right? That's the thing that's happening. That's how consciousness knows itself. It's divided itself. Gender is a distortion of consciousness, right? Masculinity and femininity are a distortion of consciousness that's very useful.
Right, we've talked about that.
Yeah, we have, and so with that whole game. So when we're playing that out sexually, we can connect our biological symbol, right? And the practical realities of propagating a species and that process, which is all beautiful, wonderful, but messy, to the broader experience of Shiva Shakti. Now you're doing it, right? Now you've created a thing that is going to be spiritual and lived. It's practical. It's completely going to blow you out of yourself. It's ego destructive. Rather than ego forming. Biological sex is ego affirming. Because we have to look a certain way. We have to be sexy. We got to do certain things. We're playing the game. We're trying to get power so we can have sex, and so lots of it means we're better.
Well, and you saying that is making me aware of how many people struggle with sexual insecurity because they don't meet the cultural benchmarks,
Yeah, I didn't for like 20 years, 30 years of my life.
I'm too short. I'm too fat. My hair's not the right color. My eyes are slightly, asymmetrical. Whatever it is, like that's a real thing. A lot of people
and then compensation for that too.
Just don't feel like they can even, go out in the world and be a sexual being because their story of attractiveness is so just abused and distorted
by that biological process. I say pay respect to the biological process. You're going to be drawn in certain ways by certain shapes and so forth, right? But if you stop there, you're stuck. You're screwed. In fact, the way out of that is beautiful. It's like we should get there. And if you're non-normative in a sexual way, right? Or if you're non-whatever, if you don't meet the classic beauty,
magazine beauty,
magazine beauty, you have a step up on consciousness.
Well, then you have to be funny.
Yeah. Well, funny is an interesting play with consciousness too, isn't it? You're trying to get ahead of the way that people see things.
Well, it's the compensation, right? So like if you're physically it and you sit down at a bar, someone is going to come talk to you, and the whole thing, it's like, if you are magnetic in that physical way, it's easier, right? Meeting your sexual needs is very easy. If you're a 300-pound dude who, like, is loud and a bit obnoxious, humor is a great way to get around the fact that you're a big guy. And like, I believe in the thing of like, if you can make a woman laugh, you can kiss her, right? Like that's a thing. And so there are so many things that go beyond the biological too. Like, we're not meant to stop there. We're not actually monkeys. We're not actually
antelope. We're consciousness playing monkey.
Exactly. And so so there's a reason that like, if I can make a woman smile, if I can make a woman laugh, I can overcome, in air quotes, the extra few pounds, because there is something that draws us to more than just the biological, right? Like, it's like the minimum for me is like that piece.
Yeah, and I think that touches on, we could spread this across a lot of different subjects in life, but when something comes easy, it's a different experience than when you have to work for it, when you have to figure it out, when you have to be aware, like, oh, when person A walks in the room, they automatically have power, attention, attractiveness, all of that stuff. I'm not having that experience when I walk in the room. So I have to, just that awareness by itself, I think raises consciousness. And then like, okay, what do I have to do to get, power, attention, whatever, which it raises your consciousness, and it also can create some, negative patterns and stuff too. So because like, now I don't have the extra pounds and I still feel like I have to be funny, but I also get to be funny. But there's a thing of like literally, I mean, it doesn't really, if you're the most beautiful woman or the most handsome man in the world and you walk into a bar, you're going to have some heads turned towards you. But if you are hilarious and in the middle of the bar cracking jokes and talking to people and, making them laugh, you're going to have a lot more heads. Right? Like, there is something that draws more of us. There's more life there. Yeah.
There's more life, right? Like, because of the effort, because I think because of the energy that goes into it. Right? Like, I put my energy into, that connection rather than the suit I'm wearing or whatever. And then that energy gets brought back to me, right? And more people are engaged by that.
Yeah, connection and aliveness are sexy, attractive qualities. And so if you can get to that point with a body that doesn't meet social benchmarks for attractiveness, like Steve's saying, like, you're ahead of the game on consciousness. And it's an interesting thing. One of the things that I do with my body, which is not, magazine quality kind of beauty, is I give people the opportunity to walk through that barrier. Because the experience of having somebody come in that's like, hey, I'm going to teach you about sex. And for me to disrobe in front of them and say, hey, it's okay if you feel disgusted by what you see. There's something that happens in people where they go, oh, instead of sitting right here and wrestling with my shame around being disgusted, because there's a part of you that's disgusted and there's a part of you that's like, oh no, I can't be disgusted. That's going to hurt her feelings, or I'm a terrible person because I feel disgusted. It's like they sit and spin there. It's like helps them like come. What's on the other side of that is, oh, now I get to play with everyone. Now I get to feel and experience the love that's there. And in some of my workshops that I've done at like sexual healing retreats and stuff, I've had people come up and just like bury their face in my belly fat and just say like, thank you for helping me see that there's love and beauty and sexiness here. Because now they're, they can go out in the world and they're now not limited by the social norms, but either for themselves or for other people.
Or we went to this thing called ISTA, sexual shamanism container, for a week, and it's really fascinating process. This is using sexuality to help people awaken, and they have process and ritual, and it's interesting. It's beautiful. But there was a kid there who was very kind of like shy with his sexuality, and he came up to me and he goes, "Are you really attracted to Xochi?" And it was so funny because he didn't mean anything ill by it. He didn't mean any demeanment. But his experience with his attraction was to the biological, right? And to seeing that very one dimensional. And I just looking right now, I'm like, she's more attractive to me than any other woman here, because there's connection, there's love, and there's beauty in that body, and it might not be traditional or whatever, but it's really rich, and he's just like, okay, couldn't get it, couldn't see it. And I like that, right? I that was a moment of conscious exploration for him because he was really sincere. He wasn't trying to be demeaning or difficult. He was just like, okay, I'm just really curious.
What's happening here? Because you're having a different experience than I am.
Yeah.
And that's a really fascinating place to be on the other side of. And my experience in that container was, okay, I've been doing this work for 4 years. And like offering my body as like, yes, it's okay for you to be disgusted by this, whatever. This is going to help you heal and grow. And what I got to encounter from that experience of somebody saying, oh, are you actually attracted to her? Was that there's pain there.
Yeah.
There is pain there. And it gave me a couple of days to really grieve that part of me, this like princess maiden thing that was like, I'm never going to achieve that. I'm never going to like grow up and be the woman that was modeled for me as a little girl. And it was so beautiful for me to actually encounter that with grace and love, and in a field where like people would just be with me. I ended up bawling in the assistant closet during one of the rituals, and one of the other assists came in and he's like, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm just working through some stuff. He's like, let's go outside. And he's like, do you want to tell me what you're processing? And I was just like, yeah, like there's a hard side to this being, not traditionally attractive. And my being really wants to process that. And I just shared with him some of the stuff, including like, I'm not afraid, like most women are afraid to like go out in the world.
Or wear certain things.
Or be alone in a parking lot. And it's like, I don't experience that. I don't get any attention when I go out in the world. I get completely dismissed and ignored, if not put down, because of how I look. And so I'm sharing this with this guy, and a typical response out in the world to that would be like, oh, you're beautiful. Oh, you're not fat. Oh, whatever. And I'm just like, bullshit. Like, this is my reality. Don't tell me I'm not fat. Because you're lying, you and I both know this isn't what we've been shown is attractive, right? And he, instead of any of that rhetoric, he just looked at me and started weeping. It was like the most beautiful, like, oh my God, I'm really being seen and held in this. And because of that, so much of that charge was able to just move through me. And now I can just be present with it. I'm not avoiding the painful side, but I'm also not holding back on the fact that like my life force and the expression that comes through in my openness, in my sensuality, in my sexuality is glorious and beautiful and powerful, and it rocks people's world.
It's its own flavor. I had that moment where I met you. I didn't find you unattractive, right? But here's this short, fat girl, it's like, why am I so attracted to her? Why are the vibes so fucking good, And it was dynamite. And it was like, whoa, okay, I have to assess this,
Something else is going on.
But, it's the same on the other end of the spectrum. The absolute beauty, especially in the feminine body, is also a problem. They did this funny study where they found that attractive women are less intelligent, not because of the beauty, not because of their own assumptions for themselves, but because people will actually not disagree with them.
So they never have to have a conversation.
They never have to like defend themselves. But if you're not normative, you have to defend yourself. You have to stand up for your being, and that's a really step towards consciousness. You see consciousness playing itself in these different bodies, and we get to experience all this. It's really valuable. Yeah. So a beautiful woman has to encounter that beauty, and there's energy in it. Automatic biological energy. Someone comes into the room and they're like, "Oh, I desire you," and they have to have like this up.
Yeah.
And then they have to learn to deal with their own
walls,
their own wall.
But it's also an obstacle too, because then they have to find a way to grow their intelligence in a more difficult field, right?
Yeah.
They have to. They're disadvantaged because they have to go and find people to argue with and to disagree with, and like. That's one of the things that one of the studies that I was reading recently was one of the highest indicators of intelligence is humor. And this whole thing of like humor is synonymous with intelligence. You have to be intelligent to make people laugh, right? Basically is the idea. And so I was looking at it and I was like, yeah, it's like you just like as you're talking, I'm like, yeah, you have to be, you have to grow this other part of yourself. But then the flip side of that is if you are more normally attractive and all those kinds of things, you have the opposite obstacle.
Yeah.
Where things are handed to you and then you need to now learn how to take things and how to grow things and how to do things.
Well, things are handed to you, but they're also imposed upon you. Right. And I think that's what he's talking about, where there's like, you have this wall of like everything out, every man is potentially dangerous predator.
Right. True.
Going to impose themselves on me.
Privilege of all kinds has its challenge. Pretty privilege, money privilege. You have to encounter it yourself at some point because you'll get things you want. You can just go get them. People will give them to you. or you can have power over them and take it from them. Whatever. Right. And that becomes a challenge too. Mm-hmm. And it's all these challenges are good to encounter. Spirituality also has this thing when you meet an obstacle and your ego can't deal with it. Something's not fulfilling you. So things aren't meeting. It's not satisfying. The energy isn't completing in somehow, right? You have to find a way forward, right? And the answer in spirituality and in sexuality is to go down to your primal self, your survival body, the energy that got you here and keeps you here, and you have to go up, right, to your transcendence, right? To me, that's the ultimate experience of sexuality, and Tantra it's inviting you all the way down. Break down. There's no limit to this essence of being, and there's no limit to the up. To the transcendence, to the unity experience, In fact, both are kind of a unity experience if you think about it.
Yeah.
And that's it can be a beautiful thing, one way or another. Whatever obstacles, whatever we're facing, however we're doing it, Tantric sex teaches. It's real, such deliberate teaching by consciousness. Yeah.
Just quickly pause for 1 sec. How do you guys feel right now? Because we do have about 5 minutes left of our thing, but it doesn't really feel like we've.
There's one more piece. And we really need to talk about like consent. I think.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I'm wondering if you guys want to do a 2-part episode with this, or if you want to just be like, okay, we're gonna keep going until we have it, and then Keith goes through and cut down till you have the right amount of time.
Yeah.
Like what's your? Do you have a whole other episode worth of stuff we haven't hit yet? Or are you like, no, it's really just this one piece?
I think that's a great idea. Let's do the 2-part.
Yeah, we could go ahead.
Because, there's so... Like, I feel like we're just, like, getting to the, like, middle of it, Where it's like... And I'm just like, 5 minutes. There's no way we can wrap this up.
Yeah. That's what I was thinking. So, like, okay, so then let's do what I would say is, like, guys, there's no way this conversation's over. We're going to come back next week to finish this one off, like a bit of an outro.
Yeah.
So maybe if we can have Steve do that, and then we'll jump back in and be like, and start off with the consent thing. Because then there'll be 2, maybe like 45-minute episodes instead of like an hour and 15, which was just going to be like too much.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful.
All right.
Good idea.
Well, do you want to finish now and then do that?
Yeah, so let's like finish our last 5-ish minutes on this, kind of wrap this up.
Cool.
So, I think that's a really good intro into sexuality. This is a topic that we can talk about forever, and it has so many little ways and extensions to this. It's really essential. And so I think we're going to continue this in another episode. But I think to wrap this up, Xochi, what would you say is like your biggest or like realization on the sexual path, as you are kind of a sexual, not kind of, you're a sexual shaman, right? Like what is kind of the thing to this point that we've talked about or that's related to you, like the juiciest piece?
Honestly, it's that permission and normalization. And, a workshop that I do that's one of my favorite is a disrobing workshop. And, you have everybody feel into, okay, what level of my body am I really excited to be seen in? And where's my edge there? And am I willing to lean into that edge a little bit? And then the permission is just given, okay, take off as much of your clothing as you want. We're all standing in a circle. And everybody takes off as much clothing as they want. And then, okay, now you have permission to give and receive attention to each person's body. And just have an experience. Whatever you experience as you look at someone's body is okay. Disgust, turn on, neutrality, whatever. You just get to like look and be okay with yourself while you're looking. And the first time I did this, it was so interesting. There was so much tension. Like the amount of charge in the room was huge, and people were just like, just even being there was uncomfortable. Some people didn't want to take any clothing off, which is perfect, right? And then it was like everybody disrobed and like the tension's still there. And then like that permission to just like look around, and then it just like flipped, and it was like Christmas morning. This celebration of like, oh my God, this isn't even a big deal. This is just fun. This is just play. And I just like, everybody just like, the energy just opened up. Most of the people who hadn't disrobed. It was like, oh, I've been told my whole life that this is such a big deal. And it's something that I can play with. So that would be like the biggest.
Yeah, it sounds like the acceptance of it as part of the self, like what Steve was saying, right? Because like what's scary about the way we deal with this is that it's such a big deal external. It is the natural man, or it's the evil, or it's the sin, or the predator. And accepting it as part of who you are, I think like to listen to that story is like just peace and then joy can come from that, right? Like it's really cool.
Beautiful. Well, I think that kind of is a good wrap up for this episode, and always an interesting conversation. One thing is, I'll introduce this in the next one, but like the left-hand path is interesting. It draws energy, and that's why we talk about it, right? That's why this is the work that's needed now. Yeah. Is the ecstatic in a lot of ways.
And I think that, a lot of people make fun of Neo-Tantra and Western Tantra because, they made it into this big sexual thing. But to me, I can really see on a grander scale the evolutionary and soul purpose of that. Like, they're tackling that topic with Tantra because it is largely repressed and distorted in our culture.
Right. There are immature and weird ways that people hold this, for sure. And it's been abusive, for sure, in some instances. But also, I think it's also important.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do like an outro, like, join us next week to finish off this conversation, blah, 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 share and put all things.
Thanks for joining us for this conversation. And we're going to continue this next week. So join us next week. Join us for the next episode. as we round up and work with and dive deeper into the topic of sex and sacred sexuality, particularly.